Matt George with us. Yeah, Matt, you ran off to Disneyland and left us here by ourselves.
Yeah, man.
I don't even remember what kind of trouble we got into last Thursday without you.
Mouse took all my money and I come crawling back.
Well, they'll do that to you.
That's all right.
They'll
That's
do
all
that.
right.
Did you have a good time? Or when was the last time you went to McDonald's? Went to Disneyland?
McDonald's far more recently than Disneyland, as D'Lo knows my diet. I think we went a little over a year ago. I'm one of those classified Disney adults. My wife and I, we love Disney. We go to Disney all the time, but this is the second time we brought our son, and the last time we could sneak him in while he was free. So that's why we got him in before he turns 3, and then he costs money. And I mean, I'm terrified of that because just tickets for my wife and I for 2 days was $750. So I don't need my son to raise that price anymore.
That's crazy. Yeah, we're not going for 2 days when we go. I've only been to Disneyland twice in my life. Once when I was like 2 or 3, because it's just not.
I mean, it's
not
in your
that,
city.
It's not.
No?
It's not. Well, that's the other time that I went. I was actually living out there, so it was easy. Just boom, go out there. Ain't got to pay for no hotel and nothing. Just go there. But it's not that it's not interesting. It was actually. It's fine. It's a really good time. The best part is the parade at the end of the
I've heard that's
night.
pretty dope.
The parade is dope, but man, the money to get up in there is.
Yeah,
Never.
The parades are during the day now. You got the night shows now. You got World of Color, Fantasmic, fireworks shows. Parades during the day.
Help me out with my timeline here. Did this whole Mike Brown thing go to hell while you were gone?
Yes. Yes. Everything went crazy, and I checked out for a while and was trying not to follow it, and then I broke my silence on the last day there because that was when the competitive offer thing came out, and I said, okay. That's when all. And then literally as I'm walking in my front door after driving home was when the deal was announced. I'm like, well, sorry, honey, I guess I'm doing a podcast now. I guess I'm back to work. And I recorded a 35-minute podcast without turning my microphone on, so I had to do it again. That was a good time. That was a real good time.
Oh no!
I went to edit it and I'm talking. There's nothing coming out. I was like, man, this might actually be my best episode.
I remember the days of the podcast that. Yeah, I remember having a few moments like that where something went wrong and you was like, I'll never be able to recreate what I just did.
It makes you think like, I need to just stop doing this altogether.
It's enough to make you consider your life choices. Yeah, for sure. Especially when you feel like you hit a home run and you're like, well, I guess that was for me and me only.
Yeah, the first episode was a banger. Second episode was, hey, Mike Brown got paid. Anyway, good night.
Yeah. Right. Oh man, that's tough. I've lived that pain, my friend. I have lived that pain. In now watching that from afar, obviously knowing how it played out, it was much ado about nothing the whole time, right?
Yeah, I feel like I was, in many ways, I was the fish that bit down too hard on the hook. But I mean, I also don't think what I was biting down on or overreacting to was necessary to begin with. Right. Like, it really was much to do about nothing. I stayed consistent even when I was not happy with the process. I stayed consistent I still believe this deal is going to get done. Casey, you had a really good breakdown on the show at one point about why this is the best case scenario for both sides. So it made so much sense for this. I just thought posturing, especially publicly, over a couple $1 million was a bad look for both sides, but an especially bad look for the Kings. And look, if I'm Mike Brown and Mike Brown's camp and I'm going to try and leverage the Kings' history of coaching for as big of a payday as I could possibly get, I'd call that smart, right? Like, the Kings have been atrocious with hiring and maintaining head coaches since Rick Adelman. In fact, like we learned, Mike Brown was the first since Adelman to get a second contract, which means 11 guys came through and not only failed to get to the postseason, but failed to keep their job for beyond just their initial agreement, which is absolutely absurd. So, I mean, I thought the whole thing was a circus. I thought the whole thing invited back in what you've been working so hard as an organization the last 2 years to get rid of, which is that kind of Kang's persona and that public image of, oh, here's the instability, here's the that King's dark cloud coming back out. But ultimately they got there, the deal got done, and I'm happy to see it.
And to be honest with you, I mean, we will, because we do this for a living, and certain fans will as well. But like because the deal got done, if if they were able to sign Malik and a couple other things or whatever, nobody's gonna remember how that week played out. I don't think. You know what I mean? Like if it doesn't, if nothing else is affected, if free agents are signed, trades are made, and that's before we even get into the actual basketball. Like if they end up being you know, they start off 19-6, on the season, like nobody's gonna remember the week that just played out.
Mhm.
If they do, we'll laugh at it. We'll be like, remember when we were da 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 da? Now look at them. You know what I mean?
Content.
It's what it is, man. And that's why I say it's not sexy, but it's really just it's results based business. Like none of it matters unless you get the job done. And the Kings got one part of the job done. They were able to sign the head coach.
I agree it's a results-based business, but it's also results-based on circumstance. And Sacramento's circumstance is what it is. And Mike Brown coming in and being the change that this organization has been looking for almost 2 decades, I think deserved a lot better and smoother treatment than how these negotiations got. Now, breaking it down in the simplest of forms, if you're an employer and your employee is asking for a raise after after they regressed, then like I understand if you're trying to simplify things, there's an argument for that. But I've thought I just thought the way the Kings handled it was unnecessary. I thought it was absurd. I thought it was comical at times. The fact that the negotiations got so public, which I know is the fault of both sides, but especially on Mike Brown's side, I just didn't think it was necessary, and it ultimately just invites unnecessary criticism and unnecessary doubt, and maybe it potentially has an effect on the Malik Monk negotiations, if at all. I'm not reporting that, have no idea, but you're just inviting this unnecessary side of everything when you could have just handled this quickly and quietly like it should have been done. And I mean, I think it's absolute cause for celebration for Mike to stick around. He's 100% the right guy for the job. And guys, while I was recording the podcast for the second time, I had kind of an epiphany because
Oh,
a lot of people have been. It's not
lit.
that deep. It's not that deep. A lot of people have been saying like one of the major arguments I saw for not bringing Mike Brown back is it's the responsibility of the coach to build their roster, or sorry, build their system around the strengths of their roster. Right? There's this. It's the same way. There's an argument of do you draft for best talent available, or you draft for fit? For a coach, it's do you implement your own system, or do you build your system around the talent that you have on your roster? And a lot of people said Mike did not do a good enough job this past season maximizing the strengths, especially on the offensive end of this roster, despite the fact that somehow he turned this roster into a top 15 defense, which we thought was very unlikely going into the season. And it dawned on me what people were asking for Mike to do, he already did. He came in and adapted and implemented a system that emphasized the strengths of his roster to where he put together a team that ended the playoff drought, finished as a third seed, and led the NBA in scoring. It was the NBA's best offense. And exactly what he consistently said was going to happen. These are teams that they're fun, but they get to the playoffs and they typically struggle in the playoffs. Lo and behold, he's a first-round playoff exit because they struggled offensively. Now he's trying to implement the defense. Now he's trying to adapt and adjust his system a little way. He's having success in the areas that he wanted to work on, but the team as a whole took a step back. Why? Because the roster and the system are not exactly on the same page, which I think is the ultimate goal for this offseason. So people who have been asking, hey, Mike, you need to be doing a better job of emphasizing the strengths of your roster. He's already done that, and it got him only so far. Granted, adapting caused a step back, but ultimately, as Mike has been talking about, it's a step back to go 2 steps forward.
Yeah, I'd be one of those guys that said like you've gotta like this is what the group that you have, and to be honest with you, probably the group that you're gonna be trying to add to this offseason. Those guys are offensive guys, and you can't. It doesn't mean you can't get better on the defensive end, but you can't strip them away of what makes them special. And I thought to a certain degree that happened from the jump this past season. And while maybe that wasn't the intentions or anything else like that, it kind of happened and put that type of energy out there. And they were always searching for that energy for the rest of the season. And this upcoming season, I would try to get back to that. I think I understand what everybody says about defense, but I think in the playoffs, you got to be able to score. And I think that's a lot of people talk about, this year's playoffs. I think that's been evident to me in these playoffs because you got a team that was great in defense in Minnesota, but they weren't able to do anything with that defense against a team that was scoring at will in Denver for 3 games. And when Minnesota was able to turn on their offense, that's when they were able to win the next 2 games. The defense, and it goes and flies in the face of conventional wisdom, but to a certain degree, it only gets you so far. When everybody's playing a certain level of good defense, like you got to be able to score at a high level and have multiple guys that can score. And I think that's what Mike Brown should look to leaning into and at least not let them forget this upcoming season.
See, I understand that and I agree with that too. I think in Mike's mind, and I mean, I'm kind of on the fence with this, but in Mike's mind, I think he believes in the modern NBA, it's easier to come up with that offense than it is to maintain sustained defense that gets you through the nights when the offense isn't good enough. And the reality is, like, the Kings surprised us defensively going back to last playoffs with how they played against the Golden State Warriors. They surprised all of us because remember the conversation going into the postseason was, here you have this defending champion with all this loads of experience, and this Kings team coming in, one with little to no playoff experience, and two, playoffs are a different beast. The physicality's at a different level. Can the Kings hang? Are they ready? They proved they were. Except for their primary strength was pretty much MIA for the entire series outside a couple of their stars. Like, they could not shoot the ball, period. And their defense is what allowed that series to remain as competitive as it did, and for the Kings to actually win a handful of those games. The Kings did not shoot well at all over the course. So it kind of feeds into both our arguments, Kenny. Like, if the Kings shoot better, you're right, they win. If the Kings shoot better, they don't need to rely on the defense as much. But I think Mike is aware that there are going to be times, with defense being as high of a level as it is in the playoffs, there are going to be times where offensively, not only is the shot just not falling because it's an off night, the opposing team is refusing to allow you to have the shot fall, and you need to be able to weather that storm and maintain that, and also defensively limit the opposing team's runs and pushes when they're trying to put a game away or create separation.
Facts.
Taking the Warriors series out of the equation the year prior, how much of an impact on what we saw from the Sacramento Kings on the defensive end do you think was Keon Ellis?
Oh, substantial. I mean, I think Keon was... I'm not saying Keon was the only guy on the roster, because De'Aaron Fox has completely bought in on the defensive end too. Davion Mitchell, we know, always had that element and actually kind of figured it out more on the offensive end of how to be effective so he could stay on the floor to bring the defense. I thought Keon Ellis was the emergence of, like, this is how Mike Brown's system, this is how the offense and the defense can coexist. You have this player that works his ass off on the defensive end of the floor, who not only is capable of stretching the floor and hitting threes, even if that's not his primary skill, he did that at a good enough level to stay on the floor. But I think, and this is what excites me about next season in particular for a jump for De'Aaron Fox, is Keon Ellis and to an extent Davion Mitchell both provided Sacramento with something they have not had in De'Aaron's entire tenure here in Sacramento. Someone to take the pressure off of Fox on defense. Fox can still lead the league in steals. When it's the fourth quarter, Fox can still guard Steph Curry or guard the opposing team's best guard like he's capable of doing. But going back to last season, not the one that just wrapped up, but the one before when the Kings made the playoffs, De'Aaron was the one taking the podium saying, none of these top guards are guarding me, and I'm guarding them every single night. That was out of necessity. Keon comes in, and that's no longer a necessity anymore, and it's working. So I think Keon was absolutely a massive part of that. But as a whole, I think it was systematically Mike figuring out how to get this group to defend, getting everybody to buy into a physical brand of basketball to where both Trey Lyles and Davion Mitchell were telling the media, like, we're enjoying playing this way. We're enjoying playing physical. I think Mike kind of got them to buy in on that end too. And then he found guys, or molded guys like Keon to step into that role, while unfortunately some guys fell back or fell out, like a kind of Chris Duarte, but maybe like mainly a Kevin Huerter.
So with all of that said, how important is it to you that Keon stays in that position next year? Particularly or specifically talking about the starting two position.
Yeah, I think Keon, what makes Keon so great is Keon can do exactly what he's doing in whatever role, whatever minutes, whatever system, whatever lineup. Like Keon can come in and do exactly what he's doing with the starters, with the bench, with a combination of the two. To me, if Malik Monk returns going forward, I think Malik Monk should just start. Like I know how important Malik is to that second unit and how stubborn isn't necessarily the right word, but how firm Mike was in his belief that Malik as a six man was the best role. And that still might be the best role for Malik. But I want to see what the starter looks like too. I just want to see it. Now, if Malik agrees to come back and re-sign with the Kings and he and Mike are okay with, hey, you're going to continue with this role, and Malik says, fine, I'll take that $17.5 million and continue this role and keep kicking it here in Sacramento. Like if he's fine with that, then go for it. I'm of the belief that if Malik Monk's coming back, a large part of it is because there's a starting job waiting for him. But even if that's not the negotiation, even if it, like, I think Malik gives the Sacramento Kings kind of a molding of both Kenny and my argument, but this is where I kind of lean with Kenny. I think Malik's impact can be felt still with the second unit by staggering your lineup and staggering your rotations. You're already doing it. De'Aaron Fox is already the first guy subbed out every single night, which is crazy to talk about. Your number one star and your number one player is the first guy taken off the floor, but that's been Mike Brown's rotation. You can continue to do that and continue with your Malik Monk minutes, start the game with the two of them out there, and then bring in Keon for whoever's struggling defensively, whoever's gassed, if you need an energy boost. Like, I think Keon can do what he did with the starting unit at any point in the game with any pairing with any lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
So I guess the only other question I would ask is, do you think that De'Aaron and the other starters who played so well on the defensive end and who were more than willing to connect that to Keon Ellis would be able to play at that same level if he's starting with the second unit, so to speak, if someone else is in that position? And obviously in the scenario that you're presenting, it's Malik Monk. Because I to be clear, that's who I was referring to as well. I'm not talking about Kevin Huerter with all due respect.
Yeah, I truly think even if Kevin Huerter stays, the days of Kevin Huerter starting, I think that ship has sailed.
Right.
Like I think he'll be given a fair chance to win the job back in training camp, but like it as of right now, it is Keon's job. Right? We're all in agreement that's Keon's spot. But I think Malik is good enough pre-negotiation to take that spot from him. And in training camp, if they give him the chance, I think the only thing holding Malik back from being the starter altogether was his role with the team, not anything that he couldn't bring to the table. Now, Keon is a better defender than Malik Monk is, 110%. But I don't think Malik Monk starting at Keon going to the bench has that drastic of effect on the defense. And if it does, I would argue that the Kings still didn't do enough in the areas that truly matter, which is with kind of their length and athleticism on the perimeter, right? Like, hopefully we're not having the conversation of Keon being the defensive savior for this season going into training camp. Like, that's a lot to put on a player who just signed his first NBA contract and is coming off of a high. But also, here's the thing that Keon's going to face now. More teams are aware of who he is. Like, people know who Keon is now. He's not going to really surprise anybody the same way that the Kings didn't surprise anybody this past season after what they did the first year. Like, Keon is not blindsiding anybody anymore. So I think if Keon gets the job, the Kings it's a great problem to have, but the Kings need to be doing more roster-wise in addition to bringing back Malik Monk to shore up their wings and their defense, maybe a Kyle Kuzma trade. I have no idea what they're looking at, but they need to do a better job of improving their overall defense and the defensive capability of this roster so that Keon isn't the guy that the Kings are leaning on to go, please continue to have us be a top 15 defensive team.
Speaking, you spoke on him a little bit. I wanted to ask you a question because I think we're in agreement with this one. I didn't get a chance to listen to the episode, but I did see the tweet that you had about the conversation you had with the Locked On Wizards guy and a trade proposal that you feel Washington or the Locked On Wizards guy believes the Washington Wizards would jump at, and that's the Kings trading Trey Lyles, Davion Mitchell, Chris Duarte, and the 13th pick for Kyle Kuzma. Two-part question. Not supposed to do it, but two-part question. Number one, would do the deal? Would you do the deal? Number two, did you get a sense that if that deal was out there, is there a possibility of like saving Trey Lyles and substituting him for somebody else or something like that, or would that be the only way that deal could get done?
Hopefully this is a roundabout way of answering both your questions, Casey, but just to provide context, like I presented two deals to our Locked On Wizards host, and when I initially, and the 13th pick was involved in both deals, I told him both these trades are happening on draft night. And when I mentioned number 13, like his eyes lit up immediately, because from his perspective, for the Washington Wizards, the value of having a top 2 pick and another lottery pick on top of that with a team that is rebuilding in a complete rebuild mode right now. In fact, that's how the conversation started. I said, lay it all out there. Like, what are the Wizards doing? They got to pick a path. What are they doing? Are they rebuilding or still trying in the East? And he said, no, we're rebuilding. And I said, okay, well, having Kuzma and Jordan Poole on your roster, I don't know how much that makes sense. And he said, well, Kuzma, one, is on a team-friendly contract, and two, Kuzma's kind of willing to be the number one guy on a bad team and help develop. I don't know how much I fully agree with that. I'll take his word over the situation because I'm obviously not there in Washington. I imagine Kuzma's a little more competitive than that and wouldn't mind trying to go somewhere where he can actually win.
Well, but I wouldn't dismiss it too much because he did resign there.
Yeah, for sure. But he also, I think it was pretty well known he resigned there after what he was initially seeking was not available to him. And sure. And there's whispers and rumors too that what he was initially seeking were conversations with the Sacramento Kings, right? And I mean, we try and connect dots and bring out our conspiracy theory boards with balls of yarn and trying to connect things. There's a hesitation of the Sacramento Kings to re-sign Harrison Barnes. All of a sudden, that deal goes quiet for a while. The Kuzma thing picks up steam, and then Kuzma goes quiet. The Kings re-sign Harrison Barnes. Kuzma goes back to Washington. I mean, this guy has been connected to the Sacramento Kings for so freaking long now. We've had this conversation so many times. The question is now the right time to pounce on it? But anyway, Kenny, going back to your question, I offered him two deals. I offered him a better talent package, which was your pick of HB or Kevin Huerter, to which he said Kevin Huerter, Chris Duarte, and 13, or expiring contracts, which, D'Lo, that's something you've talked about on this show. Do the Wizards, would the Wizards rather go a route of they take these players, they get all that money free at the end of the year? If they want to keep any of them, that's great. Unfortunately, two of the expiring contracts that the Kings have are two players that have some value to this team. Trey Lyles is one of them. Would hate to see him go. Davion Mitchell is another one, and I've done a complete 180 on Davion Mitchell over the last few months because early in the year I was ready for Davion Mitchell to go. I thought the time was done. I thought the ship had sailed, and he found his role here in Sacramento and played it well. So he ended up choosing that expiring deal contract. It makes sense. 13 was the main piece they're getting back in the deal to send Kuzma over. So it's mainly the draft pick that they want. So I get the sense, Kenny, that they might be able to find a way to not include Davion or Trey in that deal. But if truly the Wizards are seeking expirings, the Kings only have so many. And unfortunately, two of those guys have them.
Yeah, I responded to the tweet and I said, man,
I do it immediately.
I do it for sure, but I try to find a way not to have Davion and Trey Lyles in there.
I agree.
If I could get one of them out of there, I'd be trying to do that. But yeah, I think I'd do the deal if it was really right there.
I'd do it.
And as you laid out to me when I expressed my concerns about that as well, you do bolster your bench in a roundabout way with Harrison Barnes, being on the bench, and at least in the scenario that you guys are talking about, this could create a different set of problems. But like Huerter's still on the roster, and I think we're all in agreement he goes to your bench too.
Mm-hmm.
So by default, you have, of course, this all centers on Malik Monk as well.
Mm-hmm.
You have a significantly deeper bench now.
You do
in that move right there.
And look, the crazy thing about that too is if you want to get real crazy, you still got trade assets and future first round
Kevin
picks.
Huerter,
and Kevin and HB,
and HB, So like, because for a long time we had talked about a deal with getting Brandon Ingram or something like that with like HB, Kevin Huerter, we probably said 13, but like a future first or something like that. Aside from the 13 pick, you still got all those same assets that you thought maybe you could get something for to begin with. So yeah, it's surprising to me how and you know how much I just talked about how much I like Trey Lyles and Davion Mitchell, no disrespect to them, but how little you could get a guy for like Kyle Kuzma for. Like that doesn't seem like a lot to give up for Kyle Kuzma.
Well, what you just laid out, Kenny, is why just every pathway or branch of this trade that you explore and hypothetical that you explore, it just makes too much sense. Kyle Kuzma makes so much sense for what the Sacramento Kings need, bolstering the depth at a certain position. I know Kuzma's not necessarily a defensive juggernaut, but I think he's someone that can do the job as a third or fourth option on offense for this Kings team. He improves the offensive end. He bolsters your size on the defensive end. He has the contract that is team friendly, that gets lower and lower as Keegan gets paid and Fox gets paid, and that's a movable contract down the line if it does not work. You still have Harrison Barnes and Kevin Huerter here if you want to make a trade down the line, and Monty McNair talks about how important flexibility is. That move gives you flexibility to financially go forward or make a big swing with picks or make a big swing with Huerter and Barnes or whatever. Like, it just, every branch of this trade or this potential partnership or deal between Washington and Sacramento, and why the Kings would target a Kuzma, who is a safer option, over an Ingram, it just makes more and more and more and more sense the more you discuss it. That doesn't mean the deal's actually going to get done. Again, I'm having a conversation with the Locked On Wizards host. He knows what's going on in Washington. He's not working with the Washington Wizards, just like I'm not working for the Sacramento Kings. But from our understanding and our conversation, allegedly, from the Kings' perspective and the Wizards' perspective, it's a deal that both sides would like, and it's a deal that both sides could reasonably get done without having to sacrifice or hurt themselves or take a step in a direction they're not willing to go in. So it just, Kuzma to Sacramento just makes way too much sense.
How do you feel about the because you both have mentioned him, how do you feel about the Ingram conversations?
Boy, I also had a conversation. I did a podcast with Jake Madison of Locked On.
Sounds like a really good podcast, by the way. This podcast that you do.
You got something going on, man.
Whether your mics are on or not, it sounds like a great podcast.
Hey, I have one shtick. I stick with it.
I like it.
Plug. When in the conversation with the Locked On Pelicans host, the longer that conversation went on, the more I just felt like, yeah, this deal just isn't it isn't getting done. Like, it doesn't make sense. The Kings don't have the assets to get the deal done. The Pelicans aren't as desperate to get rid of Brandon Ingram as we'd like to believe here in Sacramento, to where they would accept a Sacramento package. That being said, like, there is a potential for the Kings to delay as long as they possibly can and have a deal on the table for Brandon Ingram and kind of push him up against the shot clock and go, okay, are you really going to go into next season with Ingram on your roster and risk having to pay him and figure that out later? Or this is your last chance. This is your last out. But Jake from Locked On Pelicans seems to believe that the Pelicans would have they wouldn't be too bothered with going into the season and revisiting this conversation at or around the trade deadline. And if still nothing's there, then just re-signing him and figuring it out going forward. But what also, like, an important part of the Brandon Ingram conversation in comparison to the Kyle Kuzma conversation, you're talking about two organizations that are not only in the exact same situation, they have teams that they know that are good and are trying to figure out how to be great. They're two teams that are directly competing with each other for those spots. Like, if there's a tier list in the West, the Kings and Pelicans are on the same tier, no matter how many times the Pelicans beat Sacramento last season. Like, we're talking, there's the absolute superstar, like, contender teams at the very top. And then there's that middle that both teams want to elevate themselves into, or that's what they want their foundation to be going into next season. And they're competing against each other to do it, versus a Kings Wizards scenario. Not only are the Wizards in a completely different conference, but the Wizards are in rebuild mode and are willing to get rid of talent to open up salary and go down another path. That's not the case for Kings Pelicans. So Brandon Ingram is the bigger swing. I don't see how a deal gets remotely done without Keegan Murray being involved, which makes me say absolutely not. I'm good. I'm walking away. I think it's a possibility and a conversation that should and probably has been had already in Sacramento and between two teams, but I don't see a logical scenario where it actually happens at this point.
I'm with you, Matt. I've talked myself out of the Brandon Ingram thing. I don't even know if I told you that.
Oh, you
I've
did.
talked
My
I just
secrets now.
yeah.
That's what we got. Oh, okay.
Well, you were in health and safety protocols, and I was just left here to talk to myself. And I think I've just talked myself out of that. Like it doesn't
out of it happening, or out of you wanting the deal to happen.
Matt talks about the assets and all of that. Like it's not the assets that bug me. It's that the contract.
Yes.
It's how are you going to pull this off?
Yeah.
And that's the part that I just get stuck on.
Seems like a higher degree of difficulty.
Significantly higher
than Kyle Kuzma.
Yeah, not even the same stratosphere, it feels like.
Or I'm not even going to bring them up.
Go ahead, say it.
I'm just saying. There's been reports out there about Zach LaVine. He's dirt cheap.
Go ahead, Matt. Get your boy.
Here's the thing. There was a time. There was a time when the idea of Zach LaVine and a De'Aaron Fox backcourt in Sacramento sounded exciting as hell, and it's when the Kings made an offer for LaVine while Buddy Hield was still here, and the Bulls matched it, and that fell apart completely. There are still aspects of Zach LaVine that, from a entertainment standpoint, I would not mind having here in Sacramento. But then when you turn your brain on and you realize, yeah, this isn't going to work. It doesn't make sense. Not to mention, like, his value is so in the pits right now. With like Chicago, sounds like they're going to have to attach an asset to him just to get someone to take that deal and take that contract. For the position that the Sacramento Kings are in, that screams desperation to me. And every indication that I've gotten from the organization still is that they're not desperate yet. And again, I can go right back to the comments of both Mike Brown and Monty McNair in their end of season press conference. There's no desperation here in Sacramento. They want to get better. They know they need to get better. And they know the West is chaos. But there's a very different, like the Kings and the Suns, for example, are in very completely different situations. The Suns are like, we have to right now. Our window is closing by the second. We have to. Sacramento, while we want them to win and while Fox and Sabonis are in their prime, they don't have to throw or go crazy with an absurd move that I think a Zach LaVine trade would be to more than likely fail. So it logically, there isn't anything about Zach LaVine that makes sense. Now, would I want to run a Fox and LaVine backcourt in NBA 2K? Hell yeah. Throw lobs all day.
Zach LaVine in real life and got to the playoffs a couple times.
I don't think it's absurd, by the way. I just need the deal. I don't think the idea of him on the team is absurd. For him, I'd need the deal to be perfect. It'd have to be perfect.
Also, what about Zach LaVine makes you think that he's the Mike Brown guy? Like Mike
or
Brown.
a Monty McNair guy, for that matter.
That too. But again, so much of this offseason is about getting Mike Brown's philosophy and the roster on the same page. It's not a roster overhaul, but adding guys that fit that mold. Zach LaVine does not seem like that at all.
And not saying you guys are wrong. I'm saying these guys better win some games. Because you say it's not desperation mode. I don't think it is, because Mike is now signed for a while, like jobs aren't on the line or anything else like that. You better make the playoffs next year. Like that, it's as desperate as that. Like this play-in, not making the playoffs, that's not going to fly next year. Make the playoffs.
Well, you said that this team is good enough to make the playoffs.
I think they are. You better make the playoffs next year.
I think you do that by getting wings, not another two guard.
I don't care how you do it. You better do it though. I don't care who you get in here.
At the end of the show.
I don't care what players you get in here. I don't care if it's LaVine, if it's Bruce Brown or whatever. I just know what the end result better be.
I think you care a little bit about how they do it, because if they get back to the playoffs as a 6 seed next season with Zach LaVine on their roster, and then it's very clear they've hit their ceiling, I think we care. And now they're stuck. I think we care about that a little bit.
They're in the playoffs. That's what I'm asking for. They'd be happy. If they get Bruce Brown and they're a 5 seed and they're in the playoffs, I'll be just as happy. You have to make the playoffs. You have to.
Were you happy after getting eliminated by the Warriors, though? Because we were
absolutely. I was happy with that season.
Well, yeah, we were happy with it for sure. We were happy, but that season's already happened. You're talking about having that season again. just getting back again.
Yeah, that's a good starting point.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, I mean, you're right. It is a good starting
Better than
point.
this past year.
That's true.
Jesse's telling us the show is over, so we have to go.
I think Jesse's show is over. He's like,
well,
I'm
Jesse's
done.
ready to get the hell out of here. That's for sure. I'm actually, we've got a KSFM show to do, and then I get to go hang out with Matt George at ABC 10. So,
yeah, man, check us out, ABC 10.
Check out D-Lo and
ABC 10.
KC.
You got it wrong. You said it wrong. You literally said another competitor.
ABC 10. Check us out, baby. You know what it is. Let's go. Check me out tonight. Let's go.
This dude,
Jake, come get your boy.
We'll be on post game.
One of you will.
Matt. Well,
I waited for months to be able to do that.
We'll see you tomorrow.